Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. It's going to be a great conversation. We'll turn the light on. It'll be an even better conversation. Look at that. I turned the light on. It's going to be a great conversation tonight, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and away we go. It's going to be a great show.
Century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. Get out of the movement.
All righty, everybody. Welcome. So glad to have you here with us. It's going to be a great, lovely Monday evening chat. Always a pleasure, always fun. We're streaming right now on Facebook. We are streaming right now on YouTube. We are streaming right now on Rockfin. We are live. We are doing well. So I want to thank you all. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for being here, being part of this community. I'm going to put my phone on silent so we don't get interrupted by any more of those dings. I want to give a shout out to all the people that are planning to be coming to our great, amazing conference that is coming up August 6th in Chicago. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. I'm working on getting everything in order for that. I'm here in New York for a little bit more. Next week, I'll be headed back down to Chicago to get everything in order. It's going to be great. Tara Reid will be our keynote speaker. After that, we will have on the opening plenum, we will be having Garland Nixon. After that, we will be having Peter Coffin and Dan Kovalik. Great lineup, great musicians, great allied and friendly organizations that are going to give statements. It's going to be awesome. It's just going to be tremendous, good stuff, folks. We're really, really glad to be doing that. And we're really, really happy about it. Now, the way these streams generally work is I give my opening remarks, which is what I'm doing right now. I give my opening remarks. And while I'm giving my opening remarks, you all send your super chat questions. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, you are sending me a super chat so I talk about it. That's how it works. And so you're sending me your super chat questions and I am writing them down. And then we do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We do that. And then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. That is how we do the show here. That's what we do. So, that's how it works. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, please send me a super chat. I will be writing them down throughout the show so I can get them in the second half. That's how it works. People really enjoy when they ask me random questions about communism and world history, etc., and I answer them. And so our Q&A sessions are fun. They go on for a long time, and we all enjoy them. If you want to tweet this out, want to put this on your Facebook, want to put this on your Twitter, want to put this on your Instagram, you want to drop it in a Facebook chat, drop it in a Telegram chat list. Yeah, it's always great to have people watching. So, folks, I guess I want to start out tonight's stream by giving a shout out to the Center for Political Innovation of California, CPI California. The members of the Center for Political Innovation California, they had a speak out about NATO, about the truth, about the conflict in Russia. It's great. And I'm just going to show a little bit of the video that has come out of the speak out that CPI members in the California wing of CPI that they put together. They had like a small literature table and rally, and you can just see it for yourself. So here we go.
Got a lot of are here today to demand U.S. and NATO end military escalation. Washington and NATO allies are using Ukraine against Russia, just like they did Libya, Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We want to end the conflict. We want a peaceful, neutral, demilitarized Ukraine. And we respect the right of the people of Donbass to self-determination, to decide their own fate. But Washington and NATO allies want to fight to the last Ukrainian. Ukraine is not a democracy. The situation in Ukraine didn't start in February. It started in 2014 when the U.S. overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected legal government and installed a neo-fascist regime. The people of East Ukraine said they didn't want to have anything to do with it. They declared their independence. Since then, the U.S. and puppet government of Ukraine has been bombing civilians of the Donbass region for the past 8 years. The Ukraine government today is a highly authoritarian government which has shut down opposition parties, which has shut down opposition media. Our media wants to ignore the 14,000 people who have been slaughtered by bombings and killings over the past 8 years in East Ukraine. We need to ask the people of Donbass. They have every right to defend themselves against the bombings and the killings. The Russian special military operation is justified. We must ask, how many people would have died if Russia didn't step in? What if Ukraine joined NATO? The most dangerous military alliance on the planet. Created in 1949 to contain Soviet expansion, NATO continued to evolve into a global war machine. NATO increasingly violated agreements established with the former USSR and Russian Federation that have delineated the actual strategic sphere of NATO and placed limits on the deployment of nuclear, chemical, and conventional arms in Europe. NATO continues to expand, despite these agreements, into 14 countries in Eastern Europe and will soon add Finland and Sweden. Despite the long-standing promises and treaties pledging that they would do no such thing, NATO went on to bomb Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo. It launched wars in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and Libya, resulting in close to 1 million deaths and some 38 million people driven from their homes. With the fall of the Soviet Union, NATO was rendered obsolete and should have been dismantled, but NATO was determined to stay in business. Its business is war. That meant expanding the war machine far beyond the borders of Europe and engaging in ceaseless antagonism towards Russia and China. NATO says Russia and China undercut the rules-based international order. That is, if you don't follow the rules of the global imperialists, if you don't sell out your nation's industry and resources to London and Wall Street, any country that develops and uses its resources to benefit the people is labeled a threat. Russia and China are not our enemies. Russia and China are not our enemies. And China are not our enemies. Russia 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 and China are not our enemies. Support for the so-called Euromaidan protests of 2013 constituted an active effort by member nations of NATO to undermine the legitimate government of Ukraine, and that the following establishment of new governments in Kiev in the aftermath of these interventions by NATO members constitutes a foreign-supported coup of the legitimate government of Ukraine. Number 3, the Republic Republic of Crimea and the federal city of Sevastopol are integral parts of the Russian Federation. Number 4. The people of Donbass have a right to defend themselves against the violent reactions of foreign-supported combatants, as well as the criminal government installed in Kiev. That the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic are legitimate and sovereign and have the right to exist in peace. Number 5, the current government in Kiev must stop actively hindering the ongoing peace talks between Ukraine and the Russian Federation and must implement a real and substantive commitment to peace and neutrality. The Center for Political Innovation calls upon the general public of the United States, as well as members of the United States Congress, to reevaluate our relationship with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its purpose in the 21st century, and our work toward an immediate and fundamental peace in Ukraine, to promote Ukraine's neutrality, and to prevent the further expansion of NATO beyond the delineations outlined in their existing agreements, and to recognize the legitimacy and sovereignty of Donetsk and Luhansk. Thank you.
All right. Great action. Great action that they carried out. I am really, really glad that they did this. I'm really, really glad that they were in the streets protesting. Look, it was a small crowd, but of course it's going to be a small crowd because you're talking about Russia and China and the United States. You got Russian flags, you got communist flags out there, you got Donetsk People's Republic flags. It's going to be a small crowd, of course, but that's why you should do it, because no one else is saying this, right? This is what people need to hear, and it's what they're not going to hear. And we can say it online, and I'm glad we're here, and I'm glad we're doing it here online. And we should be doing it online as much as we can. Go set up your own YouTube channel, go set up your own Twitter and make videos and all of that. But also we need to do it in the streets so that people who wouldn't go looking for this, people who are going to not come across these streams because they're filtered by the algorithm, so that those kind of people realize it as well. That's really, really important. So I'm really, really glad the folks out in California, Ryan and others, I'm really, really glad. I know Dylan was out there. Dylan, Ryan, I'm trying to think who else I saw from the video. Really glad they did it, right? I think Chris Morlock and some others. Really, really glad. Really, really glad that you did this. More actions like this are needed. We need people to be in the streets pointing out who the real enemy is and who the real enemies of humanity are. All right. Letters on roll. Writing it down. Thank you, Tyler, for that super chat. I just wrote it down. Welcome, everybody. So I wanted to just highlight those great actions that just happened out in California and encourage more people to do actions like them. We did an action like that in New York City. That was pretty well attended. Oh, Travis, Eric, and Peter, great. And we did an action like that in New York City. Russia is not our enemy. We've done a couple of those, and we're going to do more, right? People need to be made aware of who the real threat is. And our numbers are small now, but that's when it counts. And when people wake up, and as people start to continually wake up and realize what a pack of bullshit they've been sold by Joe Biden and his warmongering, woke neocon administration, as that happens, I think we're going to see more and more people come over to our side, and it's already happening. The Center for Political Innovation is growing. Every day I get new membership additions. New people are joining. Our membership is increasing, and it's worth noting. That we have the goal of 1K by May, 1,000 members for our organization by May 1st of next year. And I think there's a very good chance of us reaching our goal at the rate that we are currently growing, at the rate that people are joining us. If you look at how our Saturday Zoom calls just seem to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We just had a great conference, meetup, training school out in Lynn Valley, Kansas. We're about to have an amazing conference in Chicago with some great speakers, some great music, etc. We're doing great stuff. We're doing what any real communist organization should be doing in this time, promoting anti-imperialism, promoting working class unity and populism against the ruling elite, right? We're doing it. And there we go. Now, I wanted to also mention, I guess today is the birthday, I saw in the chat, thank you for the reminder, of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is someone who is widely respected. Everybody, it seems, respects Nelson Mandela. And I will never forget watching on the Bill O'Reilly show years ago. Bill O'Reilly was covering a controversy related to some member of Congress who was accused of being racist. So on a whim, Bill O'Reilly brought on the white supremacist, former Ku Klux Klansman, former member of Congress from Louisiana, David Duke. And David Duke came on to Fox News as a guest of Bill O'Reilly. And I will never forget, of course, as David Duke always does whenever he gets invited on TV, they introduced him as former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And then David Duke pulled out a picture and said, you called me a former Klansman, but here's Nelson Mandela. You never call him a former communist. Nelson Mandela was a communist. Thank you, David Duke, for pointing that out, because Nelson Mandela was indeed a communist, not a former communist. In fact, he was a secret member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of South Africa. And he wrote glowing things about Stalin. He wrote glowing things about Gaddafi. He wrote glowing things about Mao. He hugged Fidel Castro. Nelson Mandela was a tankie. Nelson Mandela was a tankie. And if you say that tankies, i.e., socialists and Marxists who defend existing socialism, who admire the Soviet Union, who admire China, who admire Libya, who admire Cuba, if you say that quote-unquote tankies are just the same as Nazis, you are saying that Nelson Mandela is just the same as a Nazi, because Nelson Mandela was a tankie. If there ever was one, go and look up his words. He was absolutely a tankie. And right-wingers pointed out, and leftists generally gloss over it or do a tap dance and try to ignore it because they don't want to bring up the fact that Nelson Mandela, when he was fighting for freedom on the part of the people of South Africa who were living under the brutal apartheid system, he did not get support from the American government. And in fact, the American government labeled the South African Communist Party and the African National Congress as terrorists. They were designated as terrorists by the U.S. government. The U.S. government called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. They called him a terrorist. He was receiving weapons from North Korea, receiving weapons from Libya, receiving arms and funding from the Soviet Union. And the U.S. government called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. Meanwhile, Nelson Mandela called Gaddafi, called Fidel Castro, called the Soviet Union his friends. These are historical facts. These are historical facts that they have tried to erase from our history. And the woke crowd does everything they can to cover it up. They ignore it, but it is a matter of truth, a matter of fact, that the African National Congress and the leadership that brought down the apartheid government was sympathetic to the Soviet Union, aligned with the Soviet Union, had a Marxist-Leninist perspective. These are facts. These are facts. These are facts. And it's really kind of scary how much they've covered it up. I remember when I was in high school, I took one of those tests. Which one is it? The SAT or the ACT I don't even remember. But I went to go take it. And it was at one of these places that you go and take the tests. And it wasn't at my school. It was like where a bunch of people from different schools were there to take the tests. And I remember that I sat next to a young woman, high school aged, from South Africa. Remember, I sat next to her. And so we had our break where you're allowed to talk to the other people. And so during our break in taking the test, I said to this young woman from South Africa, I said to her, she was telling me about being from South Africa. And I said, I understand South Africa has a very strong communist party. And she said, oh, no, we in South Africa, we love democracy. You must be thinking of apartheid. That was kind of like communism. She had no clue what she was talking about. South Africa has a huge communist party because of the role that communists played in the struggle to bring down the apartheid government. So that's how erased it has been, that this woman who was from South Africa, who was there taking the test, was so ignorant and so confused about what communism was. She thought that when I said South Africa had a strong communist party, she thought I must be referring to apartheid because that's an authoritarian system or something like that. That's how confused people are. And I will also say that in my life, I have met in addition to that woman, 2 other white South Africans. The first other white South African I met when I was living in New York City, and I was selling communist newspapers. And I saw a white guy with a necklace on that had, a medallion in the shape of Africa. And I said, wow. I said, you are from Africa? And he said, yes, I'm from South Africa. And I said, oh, wow. Well, you should buy this communist newspaper. Communists were key in bringing down apartheid. And he gave me this hateful look. And he said, you don't understand. You don't understand. That was my second experience with a white South African. And my third experience with a white South African was on the steps of the New York City Public Library. I was selling a communist newspaper. An older gentleman walked up and said, oh, you're a communist, yay. I said, yes, I am. And he said, let me borrow your newspaper. And I said, yes. I said, where are you from? And he said, I'm from South Africa. And, oh, wow, we love communists in South Africa. You guys were key in bringing down apartheid in South Africa. He was a very charming, friendly man. So there you go. Those are my 3 life experiences with white South Africans. The first was an ignorant teenager who did not know what communism was and thought I meant apartheid. The second was a racist who insisted that I didn't know what I was talking about and that he wouldn't get into it, but he clearly thought apartheid was good. And the third was a white South African who thought that communists were good because they played a role in the defeat of the apartheid government. And that's one of the great things about being out in the streets and engaging with people, selling newspapers, is that you meet people from different places. You hear what they have to say. Because I think about that one white South African I met, the one who was defending apartheid, the one who had the medallion around his neck, the necklace with the shape of Africa on it, and how he said, you just don't understand. I lived under it. I know how bad it is. And I think that's what the Miami Cubans are. And that's what the I lived under it's from East Germany are. That's what the people, that's what what's her name? The North Korean girl that they bring around at right-wing things. What's her name? I don't even remember what her name is. That's what they are, right? That everybody who lives in a country is going to have a perspective. And not everyone's perspective is going to be the same. And yes, many of the white South Africans feel they were victimized by the overthrow of apartheid. But we all know that apartheid was a barbaric, criminal, abusive system that, was genocidal in its essence, and that the overthrow of it was a great moment. We all know that. But if you asked him, based on his testimony, it was bad because that's his perspective. And just because he lived under it doesn't make him the expert on all things that ever happened in South Africa. Just because he was there and he saw it, I always make the analogy of, Gone with the Wind. If your understanding of the U.S. Civil War and your understanding of U.S. history was based on watching Gone with the Wind and listening to Miss Scarlett, I do declare, Captain Butler, them Yankees came down here and are killing us, and they're taking away our slaves. Oh, it's awful. It's awful. I do declare. If you based your understanding of slavery in American history on the Gone with the Wind movie, you would have one perspective. And that would be the perspective of Southern plantation owners. And that film is an honest assessment of how they saw it. That is their perspective. And they're not lying. That's what they remember. That's how they remember it happening. But they're wrong. But they're absolutely wrong, right? Just because their perception and their interpretation of events is one way doesn't make it the truth. And that's why telling me, well, Cuba's evil because I met this guy who lives down the street from me from Cuba. That guy ran away from Cuba to the center of U.S. imperialism. So what he says doesn't count for shit, right? And you tell me, oh, well, I listened to Unomi Park, and Unomi Park gets paid thousands and thousands of dollars to go around speaking to crowds of young conservatives and telling them that not only that communism's evil, but somehow the free market capitalism that's destroying the United States is communism. So no, what she says doesn't count for shit. And you would know that in every formerly socialist country of the Eastern Bloc, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Ukraine, yes, even Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, all of the formerly socialist countries, Albania, all of them say life was better under socialism than it is now. All of them. Soviet nostalgia in Russia is at an all-time high. I don't know if people saw the videos. Of what Putin just said about socialism. Zhuganov, the leader of the Communist Party, asked Putin a question, and Putin responded by saying good things about socialism and saying that socialism mixed with the market economy, Deng Xiaoping theory, was good. I don't know if you saw this video, but, communism amid this war, with the West going all in against Russia, with Soviet nostalgia and patriotism at an all-time high, communism is growing in popularity once again in Russia. And on top of that, this nostalgia never left. I mean, poll after poll after poll, people say life was better. People say that they're proud of the defeat of the Nazis. Stalin is viewed in a positive light. I'm sorry, but all kinds of people who actually lived under it say good things about socialism. They are just not the ones who come to the United States of America. People who come to the United States of America usually get a visa because they have some kind of relationship. They have some kind of in. Furthermore, I bet you didn't know this, on your citizenship forms, when you come into the United States, one of the questions is, are you a communist? And they have to say no, because if they say yes, they don't get citizenship. And if information is put forward to say that they lied, then they can lose their citizenship. So there is a reason. There is a reason that people who come to the United States from communist countries, there's a reason that they always say, oh, it was awful, I hated it, it was horrible. Because if they sound like communists, they could lose their citizenship. Furthermore, let's talk about this. Furthermore, and this is interesting, right? You always hear these people that fled from North Korea, right? Yeonmi Park, others. Where did they go to? They usually went to the other country that speaks Korean, South Korea. I'm sorry, Korea is only one country, but they go to the other, part of the Korean peninsula. Generally, people that are exiles from North Korea, they go to South Korea. Well, I bet you did not know that in South Korea, it is a crime to say anything good or supportive about North Korea under their national security law. It is a crime in South Korea. If you retweet the writings of Kim Jong-il, if you say anything positive about North Korea, you go to jail. That's why there is no Communist Party in South Korea. That's why you don't find Marxism being widely discussed in South Korea. It is a crime. So how on earth can you interview people in South Korea about North Korea and expect to get an honest opinion? If they say anything positive, they go to jail. I remember when the United Nations was having human rights hearings about North Korea. They had one in the United States, they had one in Germany, and they had one in South Korea. Well, all of the testimony given before that South Korean commission should have been completely thrown out because it was all given under duress, because it is a crime in South Korea to say anything good about North Korea. It is a crime, but that did not stop at the Olympic Games. I don't know if you recall the Olympic Games when the joint team, the South and North Korean joint Olympic team, walked into the arena. Koreans, that whole auditorium applauded for it. There was a huge support from that crowd of people because the Korean people are tired of this. They may not be allowed to say it. They may not be allowed to publicly say it, but the Korean people want peaceful reunification of the Korean peninsula, and they want it bad. They want it bad. They are tired of families divided. They are tired of U.S. troops and U.S. nukes and U.S. weapons on their soil. The people of the Korean peninsula, North and South, they want peaceful reunification. And that's not German reunification. That doesn't mean they impose free market capitalism on the North. It means the North is allowed to maintain their socialist system. The South is allowed to maintain their market system. But the people are unified as one, and the U.S. military presence that is threatening them is removed. That's what they want. That is what they absolutely want. And I hope to see the day that they get it. And honestly, Republicans are far more likely to give it to them than Democrats. Donald Trump went to North Korea. Donald Trump was the first U.S. president to ever go there. He met with Kim Jong-un in Hanoi. He met with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. And, for whatever reason, it seems that the Democrats are the ones who want to negotiate with Cuba and Iran. The Republicans are in with the Israel lobby that doesn't want to negotiate with Iran, the Shahs of Sunset Park that don't want to negotiate with Iran. And they're also in with the Miami Cubans who don't want to negotiate with Cuba. So it's the Republicans while they want to escalate with Iran to please the Israel lobby and Netanyahu, and while they want to escalate with Cuba to please the Miami Cubans, they are the ones that want to negotiate with North Korea. So because of that, if you want peace on the Korean Peninsula, Republicans are more likely to give it. Now, if you want things to get better for Iran, you want things to get better for Cuba, it's Democrats who are more likely to give it. And at the end of the day, if you're a legitimate communist, you want peace and better relations with all countries, right? You want to end all of U.S. imperialist aggression and attacks on anti-imperialist and socialist states. So at the end of the day, it just shows that Democrats and Republicans are 6 one way, half a dozen the other. We need to build up class struggle from below, etc. Romania, 66% said they would vote for Ceausescu if he ran for president today. Thank you very much, Gleb, for that information. I'm going to write Ceausescu down. I'm going to write that down, and we'll talk about that in the second half of the show. Thank you very much. If anyone has another super chat for the second half of the show, that would be awesome. So I'm going to continue with my opening remarks for a little bit longer because I'm going to do one of those things that I always do on these streams. I do this occasionally on these streams where I remind you that I am actually a human being. I am not a communist robot. It's like part of my programming. Remind the people that you are a human being. Tell them about something human and normal that you did in order to remind them you are not a communist robot. That way you will trick them and they will not know that you are an evil communist robot programmed by Vladimir Putin to brainwash the minds of the Americans. Tell them something normal that you did, Caleb. Tell them something normal. Tell them something normal. Well, so there we go. I am going to tell them something normal that I did. Saturday night, I did not stream, folks. I hope you didn't miss me too bad, but I did not stream on Saturday night. I must confess that Saturday night, it was the first weekend I'd been back. I'd been away for quite some time. I was in Kansas, and then I was in Oklahoma, and then I was in Chicago. So I came back, and it was our first weekend back. So I must confess, I know it is probably a crime against my revolutionary duties, but my wife and I went to the movies. We went to the movies. I know it's not as normal as Taryn Fivek playing her Pokemon cards or whatever she does, but it probably counts for something. I'm totally normal. I'm totally normal. But anyway, we went to the movies, my wife and I. And I actually had a great time at the movies because we went and saw the new Elvis movie. And I must confess, there was a time in my life when I was a young teenager where I loved Elvis. I was very interested in Elvis. I read a biography of Elvis called Down at the End of Lonely Street, The Life and Times of Elvis Presley. I watched the Elvis comeback special, 1968, on VHS tape. I watched Elvis Live from Hawaii on VHS tape, and I loved it. I was into the whole Elvis thing for a while. It was before I was really getting to be political. I liked the music. I had a cassette tape of his number one hits, and I liked Elvis. I liked the music, right? It was fun stuff. So I went to see the movie. It's a Baz Luhrmann movie. Baz Luhrmann, he's the guy who did The Great Gatsby. He's the guy who did, didn't he do like Moulin Rouge or something like that? It was good. The Elvis movie was good. However, it was I don't know how to say this right because I understand why they did it. Okay. It was historically inaccurate. But they needed to do this. They needed to do it. But this is what I want to talk about because, I'm always thinking about politics. I am always thinking about politics, folks. Always. I mean, no matter where I'm at, if I'm at the movies, I'm thinking about politics. If I got the TV on, I'm thinking about politics. And Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party, used to always tell people to put their class glasses on. And I cannot take my class glasses on when I'm at the movies. I can't take them off, right? So I'm watching this movie, and I am somebody who has read multiple biographies of Elvis Presley, and I'm watching this, and, it was not historically accurate. The politics in the movie, they made Elvis look like a progressive. And as much as I like his music, Elvis was not a progressive. Elvis was racist. Elvis was a Richard Nixon supporter. Elvis was, he did play black music. He did learn African-American music, but his career was largely because he was a white dude who could do black music. And he wasn't a progressive. I'm just telling you the facts. Elvis Presley was not a leftist. He hated Vietnam War protesters. He hated the Beatles because he thought they were too left-wing. They weren't patriotic and conservative enough. Elvis Presley was a conservative. He was absolutely a conservative. He was definitely a conservative. But they couldn't make that movie, right? If you had shown Elvis as a conservative in this movie, it would have just, with the atmosphere in the country that we're in, it wouldn't have worked, right? It wouldn't have worked because right now we're having this whole thing about, wokeness and about Black Lives Matter and, Trumpism and January 6th. And if you had portrayed Elvis for who he really was politically, the audience wouldn't have accepted it. And so they did something, and this is fascinating. How did they pull this off, right? Because Elvis was not a progressive. So how did they not completely just straight up lie, but not show Elvis for what he was? And this is what's fascinating to me. There was a couple seconds, there was like a year when Elvis was putting out what sounded kind of like a vaguely left-wing message. But it wasn't because he believed it. It was because of the atmosphere in the country. And this is what's really fascinating. In this movie that they made, the new Elvis movie, they make a big deal out of the 1968 Elvis comeback special. Around Christmas of 1968, Elvis did a comeback special. He filmed it, it was shown at Christmas time, but they filmed it shortly after RFK was killed, and the country was already upset about the death of Martin Luther King. And if you watch the comeback special of Elvis, it wasn't full-on left-wing, but it was vaguely left-wing. It was vaguely left-wing because that was the atmosphere in the country. If you watched it, he ended with a song that seemed to be was about Martin Luther King Jr., about will this dream come alive? Vaguely supporting Martin Luther King, vaguely opposing racism. He did a lot of African American spirituals, which at the time that was kind of a political statement, even though his whole career he'd been doing African American songs. But the fact that he did a number of African American spirituals, on that special, that was making a political statement. And also, and they didn't show this in the new movie, Elvis made a movie in 1969, which actually I think you all might get a kick out of it. I watch movies from this weird historical perspective. There's a movie that Elvis made in 1969, the following year, and it's called A Change of Habit. And Elvis movies usually are awful, right? If you go watch Blue Hawaii, it'll bore the shit out of you. If you go watch, GI Blues, it'll bore the shit out of you. A lot of Elvis movies they're bad movies because Elvis is the actor and he doesn't have a lot of patience. He wanted to film the movies real quick, and they were low budget movies because they were paying all their money to have Elvis as the actor, so they didn't have much money left over for other things. And but there's a movie he made in 1969. It's called A Change of Habit, and the film is left-wing, kind of, not really, but it's this woman who is a nun. She wants to go, do missionary work in Washington Heights in New York City. And they go to this neighborhood where it's mainly Latino folks and Puerto Ricans who are getting, badly treated by the police and are dealing with the problems of crime and organized crime. And because of that, they become aware of poverty, and she stops being a nun and becomes a community organizer. There's some scenes where there's a riot of the people against police brutality and stuff. And you watch it, it's pretty left wing. It's not full on left wing. It's not, it's not preaching Marxism or communism, but it's got this it's definitely anti-racist, and it's about the people are suffering. And Elvis plays this doctor who's got a heart of gold, and you watch it, and it's and what was going on, right? And so this movie that Baz Luhrmann just made, right, where it's about the life of Elvis Presley, and they're trying to show Elvis in an atmosphere where an audience now would like him. That's basically what they're trying to do. And if they had shown Elvis during the Nixon years, Elvis who loved Richard Nixon, Elvis who visited Nixon at the White House to get a fake drug enforcement agency, not a fake one, but a real official badge from the Drug Enforcement Agency, and all of that. you know, that Elvis, if they'd shown that Elvis, the audiences would have hated him. So in order to make you like him, they made a big deal out of like the one or 2 years in his life where he was doing vaguely, not really left wing. I mean, he was never criticizing the Vietnam War. He supported the Vietnam War. He hated the protesters, never criticized the Vietnam War, never, you know, really, he didn't like support the Black Panthers or anything. But at the time where Elvis was kind of focusing on a racism is bad kind of message, right? When he did this Christmas special in 1968, when he did this movie, A Change of Habit, when he did the song In the Ghetto, and he did another song called Don't Cry Daddy, that were both about like the hardship of low-income African-American folks. When Elvis was kind of sort of doing this vaguely kind of left-wing, kind of anti-racist stuff, they made a big deal out of that in the movie. But that shows you that there are times, look, what happened in 1968? Let's just talk about what happened in 1968. April of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. He was killed, murdered. And after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, every major city in the United States went up in flames. Urban rebellions swept the entire country because Dr. Martin Luther King had been an advocate of peace, nonviolence. And the African-American community was so angry about police brutality, angry about their ongoing mistreatment. And to have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gunned down and killed, that was too much. And so the country went up in flames. And let's not forget, you know, they say that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they try to make it sound like it was not about class, but in the final years of his life, he was advocating socialism. He said democratic socialism was the answer. He rejected Marxism, and he was always a Christian, always an opponent of dialectical materialism. He criticized dialectical materialism. He embraced Hegel, that said Marx had distorted Hegel. But he was always an advocate, or not always, but in the final years of his life, he became a full-on advocate of socialism. He gave the Beyond Vietnam speech, which has some amazing quotes from it. And then, where did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. get killed? Where was Dr. Martin Luther King killed? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot down on a picket line. Don't forget it. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot down on a picket line. Not literally on a picket line, but pretty much on a picket line. Why? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went to Memphis, Tennessee. And where did he go? Why did he go to Memphis, Tennessee? Because he was supporting a group of striking workers, sanitation workers who were on strike. That's why he went to Memphis. He was there to support a union, to support class struggle. There was the sanitation workers of San Francisco were on strike. They were not being paid decent wages. People were disrespecting them. The city was refusing to meet with them and respect them. So they marched in the streets with signs that said, "I am a man. I am a man." And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went all the way to Memphis to stand on the picket line with a group of striking, mostly African-American, but not all African-American, sanitation workers in the city of Memphis, Tennessee. And that is where he was killed. That's where he was gunned down. So, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a martyr in the class struggle. He is a martyr in the class struggle. Yes, he was threatened. Yes, he was tortured. Yes, he was beaten up and arrested around, the struggle for racial justice. But ultimately, they took his life when he went from simply the struggle for racial equality into the class struggle. Dr. Martin Luther King was a martyr of the class war between the capitalists and the workers, between the workers and the bosses. That is a fact that they will never highlight, that he was killed on the picket line, marching with black and white workers together against capitalism and against the Vietnam War. That is the Martin Luther King they don't want you to know. There's a lot of good writing about the final years of Dr. Martin Luther King's life, where they've covered up the fact that he was so anti-imperialist and so anti-war and so socialistic in his final years. That needs to be highlighted. Matt Hubbard's book on climate change. I haven't read it. I don't know enough about it, Morgan. I'll have to go read that book and tell you what I think of it. But has the meaning of conservative and liberal changed? That's a good question. Has the meaning of liberal and conservative changed? Writing it down. But Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot down on a picket line as a martyr of the class struggle. There are many people who believe the U.S. government had something to do with it, and there was a lawsuit by Dr. Martin Luther King's family where they alleged there was government complicity in the killing, and they actually won a settlement from the government. Now, not much is known about that, but they did win a settlement from the government, arguing that to some degree or other there was U.S. government complicity in the assassination. So yes, he was in his hotel when he was shot down, but he was in Memphis to support a group of striking workers. He was shot down on a picket line. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot down on a picket line. And point that out to people. The next time you're with your coworkers and it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, say to them, yeah, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot down on the picket line, and point that out to them. Another interesting thing, which often gets ignored, is that James Earl Ray, the shooter who killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., James Earl Ray was a member of Friends of Rhodesia. Did you know that? Bet you didn't know that. But James Earl Ray was a white supremacist, and he supported the apartheid regime of Rhodesia, named after Cecil Rhodes, right? The apartheid regime that was overthrown to create Zimbabwe. And, the people of Zimbabwe, the Africans, were waging a revolutionary war supported by the Soviet Union, supported by China, against the Rhodesian apartheid state. And so white supremacists from around the world were raising money for Rhodesia. And there was something called the Friends of Rhodesia Club. And James Earl Ray, the guy who shot Dr. Martin Luther King, was a member of the Friends of Rhodesia Club. So not only was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. shot down on a picket line, but Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed by an anti-Mugabe activist. So he was basically shot by somebody who was opposed to Robert Mugabe, someone who was an anti-Robert Mugabe activist, because Robert Mugabe was the leader of the ZANU Liberation Army that the Friends of South Africa or the Friends of Rhodesia were mobilizing to fight against. So if you really want to blow somebody's mind, I want to blow one of your coworkers or your fellow students at the university's minds, next time they bring up Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., tell them, number one, he was shot down on a picket line, and number two, he was shot by an anti-Mugabe activist. Point that out. He was shot down by an anti-Robert Mugabe activist. So there you go. But regardless, after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, the country went up in flames. Every urban center was in rebellion. Rioting swept the country. Mao Zedong put out a statement supporting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and condemning the killing and saying it was done by the U.S. government. And the country was up in flames. And, at that point, there was a feeling on the part of the establishment, we've got to do everything we possibly can to calm things the fuck down. And that's why you had, I think James Brown, went out and, was telling people to stop rioting. And, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed. And, what else happened? I believe that President Lyndon Johnson was on TV and gave this solemn speech. And Elvis doing this, like, suddenly emphasizing anti-racism. Elvis doing that and suddenly emphasizing anti-racism was very much, it was very much an effort to try and accommodate this explosion that was coming in the country. Later, I believe it was spring, shortly afterwards, you had the Columbia Rebellion, right after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Mark Rudd and, Students for a Democratic Society, they seized university buildings at Columbia University and battled the police and were occupying buildings. And then, at the Democratic National Convention in 1968 in Chicago, you had, because they were nominating a pro-Vietnam War candidate, Hubert Humphrey, even though the majority of Democrats were against the Vietnam War. And so the anti-war protesters were beaten up in the streets and clubbed, and it was very ugly and violent. 1968 was an intense year, and Richard Nixon ultimately won the presidential election and went into office in 1969. That's why Rhodes scholar Rachel Maddow pushes the Cold War so hard. Well, there you go. I'm just going to write that down. Rhodes scholar Rachel Maddow pushes the Cold War so hard. And, I mean, the country was in turmoil. So for a few minutes, I mean, Elvis did this song called In the Ghetto, which was about the hardship of poverty and poverty, leading to crime. Elvis, what else did he do? He did that. And then he did this movie called A Change of Habit, which is kind of hilariously leftist kind of, and then he did his 1968 Christmas special, which had a lot of, black music in it and was kind of dedicated to Martin Luther King Jr. But I'm just going to break it to you folks. That's not who Elvis really was. And they don't show who Elvis really was politically in this movie because he couldn't be the hero of a movie and be who he was. Elvis Presley supported the Vietnam War, was opposed to anti-Vietnam War protesters. Elvis was a big fan of Richard Nixon, loved Richard Nixon, so much so that he went to visit Richard Nixon in the White House. And when he went to visit Richard Nixon in the White House, Richard Nixon agreed to make him an officer of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. And so Elvis had his own badge. And was actually a federal narc, right? It's kind of funny. He's a rock star, but he was a drug enforcement narcotics agent, basically. He was a drug enforcement agent. And because he had that badge, he could never be arrested for possessing drugs because he was using lots and lots of drugs. He used cocaine, he used heroin, he used drugs up and down, backwards and forwards. He was using all kinds of drugs, uppers and downers. And because he had that badge, he couldn't be arrested for it. Richard Nixon gave him that badge in exchange for doing a photo op at the White House with President Nixon. Yeah, I mean, I don't know quite what to tell you. I mean, Elvis Presley, he really got into being an evangelical, which that was before the rise of the modern religious right. So it didn't quite have the political connotations that had later in like the 1980s. He died in 1977. So, he didn't really, you don't see, the political developments there, but he was very much into being an evangelical. He hated the Beatles. He hated the Rolling Stones. He hated, the hippie rock music. He considered it to be, profane. He considered it to be, I don't know what. He didn't like it. So, and honestly, there's a lot of resentment in the black community about Elvis because everybody knows, and this movie, they couldn't ignore it either, is that the reason Elvis became famous was because he was a white guy who could sing black music. And that was it, is that he was a white man who could sing black music. Black performers were not allowed to perform. He started out in Memphis, Tennessee, and they didn't allow black people on a lot of the stages. But black music was very much in demand. It has a heavy beat to it. It's very popular. It's very lively. And so he became famous because he was white and could sing black music. There's a lot of feeling in the black community. Look, he stole our music. And I mean, I don't blame them for feeling that way. And that in addition to, doing that, he very much, he had kind of a complicated relationship. He was friends with B.B. King. He was friends with some of the black performers of the era, but not all of them. And Elvis, he was known to, he supported Nixon. He really hated the Black Panthers. He was not a leftist, right? And they didn't show that in the movie. They kind of, they fudged it to make Elvis look better. Because if you watch this movie, what I thought was interesting is this movie, the villain was Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks played Tom Parker. And Tom Parker, Colonel Parker, Elvis's agent. And the premise of the film is basically that, that Tom Parker ripped off Elvis, which he did, I guess. And that was the premise of the movie. It was about, Colonel Parker, Tom Parker, Elvis's agent, who was dishonest and manipulative, who ripped off Elvis and stole lots of money from him, made money off of his success. That's what the movie was about. And it was entertaining. It was a great movie, and I recommend it. I mean, it's a really good movie. But I guess I just thought it was interesting how they played with history, because as somebody who's read biographies of Elvis and such, he wasn't politically not a good dude, right? He was a working class guy from Memphis. His father had gone to jail for writing a bad check and committing bank fraud. And he went to jail for like a year because basically the family, in order to get by, they needed to. So he wrote a check for money he didn't have in order to get by, and he went to jail for it. He's a working class guy from Memphis, Tennessee. Yeah, I mean, he was a great performer and a great musician. I actually won, believe it or not, I won $100 in 8th grade. I did an Elvis impersonation for a school talent show, and it was a hit, and I won $100. So there you go. And, some of that, the music is just good, and the movie was good. So there you go. I guess I just wanted to throw that out there, wanted to mention it because I thought that's worth mentioning. And then that proves that I'm totally normal. I'm totally normal. I went to the movies with my wife, and that makes me normal. Okay, now I have told the audience that I am normal. They will believe me. And because they believe me, I can now go back to talking about communism. They will believe me that I did something completely normal and I went to the movies. There we go. All right. But no, it's fun. I really do recommend it. I do recommend it. I enjoyed the movie. It was good stuff. Folks, if you want to give a donation to help us have the conference that's coming up for Chicago, you can send a donation to CPI Events on Cash App. That would be a great way to send us a donation for the conference. It's going to be awesome. I just talked with the musician. My good friend Paul Shepard is a great musician, a folk musician. He's going to be there. And a musician that I don't know is volunteering, but he's been vouched for by another one of our speakers, a guy named Jesse Jett. He's going to come and do a set as well. So there'll be multiple musicians performing. That's going to be great. We're going to actually have a presentation by some of the people from Chicago that are on the ground doing organizing in the city right now. Very funny. They're going to be giving a presentation about being on the ground. I'm writing out the program, trying to make sure we have time for all the guests, time for everybody, just trying to write it out and make sure that we have what we need because it's going to be a packed event. It's just going to be so awesome. So if you can make it to Chicago, please be there because you won't regret it. This is going to be an amazing event. High security at this event, though. There will be a lot of security because we know the synthetic left. They're out to get me. They're definitely out to get Tara Reid. I'll tell you that much. There'll be a lot of security at the event, but it'll be worth it. So I'm pretty excited about that. So there you go. Folks. There you go. So, all right. So I think at this point, we will do our roll call. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. And then I'll start answering your super chat questions. I got a few super chats here, but keep the super chats rolling in because that gives me plenty to talk about. No, I cannot. That was an easy super chat to answer because the answer is no. But there you go. Anybody, names and locations. We got Ryan in Oakland, Marta in Poland. We got Cleveland Pirate Alex. There we go. Tim in St. Louis, Dan from India, UK, Chicago, Smedley Butler. Shout out to you. We got St. Louis, Bradley Wasser, Cleveland, Dustin Schlesinger, Establishment Disliker in Texas, Gabby in Chicago. Shout out to you, Gabby. Shout out to you and your lovely son. You are awesome. So glad we could sit down and have a chat when I was in town. KCMO, Missouri, Colin in Greensboro, Chris in Salt Lake City, Tim in La Junta, Kieran from San Diego. Shout out to you. Chester, England. We got Cedar Park, Texas, West Virginia, Mel in Australia, Tyler. Shout out to you, Tyler. Good stuff. From Jimmy Dore's Garage, Johnny Bravo, Heidi in Edinburgh, Brazil, Italia, Micah from Las Vegas, neither here nor there. Dave from Jersey Shore, Lexi from Texas, Kendall in San Diego, Richard in Woodland, Caracas, Venezuela. Very, 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 very good. Oh, you're translating the Fidel book. Excellent. Oh, we got Antonio. Shout out to you, Antonio. You're great. Richard from Woodland, California, the Frozen Iceland, Bergen County. We got Dayton, Ohio, Marjorie Williams. Shout out to you, Marjorie. Josh in St. Louis, Missouri. David from Michigan. Ben in Suffolk, Baltimore. Abel from Milwaukee, DC, Victoria, Australia, Norway. DIJI from India, Victoria, Heredia, I don't know where that is. Minneapolis, very good. Mo from Toronto. Carmen from Ridge, Pennsylvania. Nassau County, Char, Darling. Very, very, very good. St. David's from Bermuda. Liberal, Kansas. A lot of Ohioans. Very, very good. MLK was gunned down in front of his hotel room. Yes, and he was in Memphis to stand in solidarity with the sanitation workers. I said that multiple times. Let's just stop, right? Let's just talk about this super chat for a minute. I don't like to do this, but do you see this? You know what this is? This is that Family Guy clip. Phony! 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 He's a big fat phony! I know he was killed in his hotel room, my friend, but he was in Memphis, Tennessee, to stand in solidarity with striking sanitation workers. Dude, that's the whole reason he was in Memphis. He wasn't literally on the picket line when he got shot down, but he was in Memphis to support a strike of sanitation workers. He was gunned down on a picket line. But you got me. Phony! You're a big fat phony, you know? So there you go. All right. Dan, Connor from Brooklyn, Caps Lock. Oh, God. We're having a wild night, aren't we? Nate, please hold the L's, right? At least he gave $10 for it. Oh, boy. Long Island strong. There we go. There we go. All righty. What a night. What a night. What a night. All righty. All righty. Balthazar is laughing. Vegas, baby. There we go. Mark from California. Thank you, Caleb. Bob Troy from New York. Shout out to you, Bob Troy. Mid-Atlantic. There we go. There we go. Alan in Chicago is with us. Ilgo in Germany is with us. Same name gang is with us. He's also in the Windy City. Well, shout out to you in the Windy City. All the good stuff. There you go. There you go, everybody. So glad to have you all here. Yada Yisrael is also in Chicago. I assume I'll get to meet you at the conference. Very, very good. Very, very good. New Haven, Connecticut. Stephanie. Shout out to you, Stephanie. I'm glad you're joining us. Cool stuff. Cool stuff. Clinton Frazier. Hi from Peru. Cheers from Mexico. Very, very good. Very, very good to have everyone here. Very, very good to have you all here. All righty. All righty. All righty, folks. All right. Oh, we got Utica, Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Welcome. Very good. All right. I'm going to start. Oh, a Better American, Michigan. I just want to keep calling you out all night, but I can't do that. I have to get to the super chats. So keep the super chats rolling in. Keep the super chats rolling in. The first super chat is from Tyler, and he is asking me about the letter where Karl Marx reflected on the role of the individual in history to Engels. I do not know which letter that is because of the fact that I've only seen it referenced. I have not read the actual letter. But Tyler, I am going to go do my research, and I think when I find that letter, I will actually read the respective paragraphs on this stream. So that'll be a project for me to go and actually dig up that individual letter. I've heard endless references to it. It's often referenced, but I will actually go and dig it up because you asked, and I think it's an important thing for us to have. So there you go. There you go. Thank you, Tyler, for giving me an assignment. We will go and dig up that letter so that we can actually read it here on these streams. And there we go. All righty. In Romania, 66% of the population said that they would vote for Ceausescu. I believe it. I believe it. I totally believe that Ceausescu is popular because free market capitalism has made life in Romania quite miserable. I actually did research. I wrote an article about Romania a long time ago. And in order to get facts, I actually went and I read the U.S. Library of Congress country study of Romania. Bet you didn't know this, but the U.S. Library of Congress has published a country study of every country in the world. Now, they did this in the mid-1980s. So obviously, like, there's one study for the Soviet Union. You know, it's not like every, all the countries that we have now are not in that study. However, that's what they did. And in the country study on Romania, they had a lot of statistics about how the Romanian Communist Party had improved living conditions. And I'm actually going to pull up that article. Why not? I am actually going to pull up the article, and I'm going to read to you some of the statistics I got from the country study, that were included in the article. So there you go. I am going to pull that up. So between 1950 and 1970, the number of hospital beds per 1,000 people more than doubled in Romania. Can you imagine that? A doubling amount of hospital beds per 1,000 people. The number of doctors per 1,000 people increased by 25%. The infant mortality rate was reduced by more than 75% from 1950 to 1984. This is according not to communists, but this is according to the U.S. country study. The U.S. Department, the U.S. Library of Congress country study says this about Romania. In 1945, only 27% of people were able to read and write. However, by 1966, illiteracy was eradicated, according to the country study. So a minority of the people in the country were able to read and write. 27% of the country. Only 27% could read and write. But by 1970, the communists wiped out illiteracy in the country. Now, if that's not a huge achievement, I don't know what it is. By 1970, the number of teachers had tripled, and the number of university professors in Romania had gone from only 2,000 before World War II to 13,000. That's what socialism did in Romania. And that's just worth pointing out. I mean, it needs to be pointed out because socialism made life better in Romania, right? Those are statistics I got from the American government, from their country study on Romania. So no wonder Ceausescu is popular in Romania. If he did that, and then if you look at what happened in the 90s during the free market years in Romania, it makes sense that people would vote for him. All right, watched Apocalypse Now the other day. Never picked up any before, but they reference you can never step in the same river twice, and Dialectics. Oh, I haven't seen Apocalypse Now. It's one of those Vietnam War movies. I have not seen it. That is very interesting. All right, I'm going to write down Apocalypse Now. Now references Dialectics. All right, very good. And is there any good, concise, comprehensive English language guide to the theory and program of socialism with Chinese characteristics and Xi Jinping? All righty, writing it down. English language guide to socialism with Chinese characteristics and Xi Jinping. Very good. Wrote it down. We will get to that. Excellent. And keep the super chats rolling in, folks, because that's how we will keep the second half of this show going, is that I will be answering your super chats. Next question is, has the meaning of liberal and conservative changed? Yes and no. Yes and no. There has been a proper definition of liberal, and then there has been the layman definition of liberal. And they have stayed consistent for the most part. I mean, the layman, what you might call the layman definition of liberal, is pretty new. But, really, since the Cold War began, or really, maybe even since the 1930s, the definition of liberal, even since the 1920s, the definition of liberal, the layman definition versus the proper definition have been around, right? These are two different definitions of the same word, and we should just go over them. One is basically American political slang. What did American left-wing attitudes to whether the U.S. should have joined war differ between World War I and... Okay, all right. Did American attitudes toward... All righty. Wrote it down, and we'll answer that. So, liberalism is an ideology that comes out of the struggle to overthrow feudalism. The word, it's an English word, and it basically referred to those who fight for individual rights, for the rights of the individual. That's what liberal means. It is an ideology that favors human rights, individual rights. All right, writing it down. Show it to you. And That's what it is. It is the belief in individual rights and human rights. It's the ideology of the bourgeoisie as they were overthrowing feudalism. It's the ideology of John Locke, who talked about life, liberty, and property. It is the ideology of Thomas Jefferson, who said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's the ideology of the French Revolution that talked about the Declaration of the Rights of Man and liberté, égalité, fraternité. That's what liberalism is. It is the belief, the rights of the individual, protecting the rights of the individual from society. I believe it is said by Henry David Thoreau. He said, the government is best that governs least. The government is best that governs least, that stays out of your business, right? And it's this belief that individuals should not be compelled by society against their will unless it is absolutely necessary, right? We obviously have laws against murder. People can't go around murdering even if they want to. But the reason they can't do it is they're violating the rights of other people. It is the belief that the right of individuals to choose their own religion, the right of the individual to speech, the right of the individual to his property and private enterprise, the right of the individual to his beliefs. This is liberalism, right? And economic liberalism tends to refer to the free market, right? They talk about classical liberals, and then they talk about neoliberal economics. That's Milton Friedman. And then classical liberals, that's just classical, total neoclassical economics, free market. And then you have neoliberal economics, which is monetarism. That's Milton Friedman. That's Alan Greenspan, Friedrich von Hayek, the Montpellier Society, etc. So, that's economic liberalism, is the belief the government should stay out of the economy, which is a variant of classical liberalism. Liberalism means individual rights above all else. The government stays out. That's what liberalism means. Now, in the United States, in common vernacular, starting really in about the 1920s, liberal meant more left-wing, which is not exactly what the term means. Because, for example, in economics, conservatives in the United States tend to favor free market liberal policies more than so-called liberals do, than left-wing forces do. So when it comes to economics, conservatives are more liberal on economic matters than liberals are. But in American vernacular, we refer to anything that is left-wing as liberal, right? When birth control was being legalized, that was society saying, if you want to use birth control, that's your business. Well, that was a left-wing position. So it was considered to be left-wing. It was considered to be liberal, right? Because society is saying, all right, you don't have to do that. However, in the United States, socialism as a political movement also became associated with the left wing, right? And so you go back to before World War I. Before World War I in American politics, you had socialism, which was Eugene Debs, which was Daniel de Leon, the IWW. But then you had another group of people that were called progressives and liberals, and they were supporters of Woodrow Wilson. And the progressives and liberals and the socialists, there was a big line between them. They were not the same thing at all, right? The progressives, they tended to believe in eugenics. They tended to be very racist. They tended to want the government to start breeding people. The progressives were all about using science to advance society, and they were anti-religious, right? They believed in science, but they were very authoritarian. They were very racist, and they were, and Woodrow Wilson was an expression of what you can call the progressive movement of the early 20s. The progressives of the, not of the early 20s, but of the early 20th century. The progressives, they were not socialists. They did not like socialists because they saw socialists as populists, as rabble-rousers. They were for the common people. Woodrow Wilson went to Harvard, and Woodrow Wilson was racist, and Woodrow Wilson wanted to breed people like animals. And these were the progressives that tended to be Democrats. They were very elitist. They were very in favor of the free market. They were in favor of laws, sterilizing disabled people. They were in favor of laws against racial integration. Those were the progressives, right? They were not the socialists. And they didn't like the socialists because the socialists were rabble-rousers. The socialists was for the common people, and they were elitists. They didn't like the common people. And then there were conservatives, and conservatives were opposed to the progressives because they just wanted to, have small town values. Everyone follow the Bible, just do things the old fashioned way. They didn't want science imposed on society. They didn't want religious regulations to be rolled back. They didn't want people, so it was like you had conservatives, you had progressives, and then socialism was something different. But over the course of, the 1920s, as the labor movement got going, and especially when Roosevelt was president, progressives, so-called progressives, started to embrace more economic left-wing rhetoric. And on top of that, socialists started supporting and aligning with progressives against fascism. So progressivism kind of changed its character. And that's where we get what we call liberalism today. Liberalism today is a mishmash of vaguely social democratic ideas and vaguely progressive ideas, right? They believe in science. They don't like religion. They want society to be more scientific. They want to roll back regulations that are done in the name of morality and religion. They also favor more of a social democratic welfare state. And this current that you can really call the modern Democratic Party is what you can call liberalism. It's what Americans call liberalism. That's not what liberalism actually means. That's not the actual origin of the term. It's just in America, we can't have communists and leftists. We can't have socialists. So we have conservatives and liberals. Well, what we call liberals is a mishmash ideology that pulls from progressivism and also pulls from socialism or social democracy. And it's the opposition to conservatism, which is economic liberalism and traditionalism, right? American conservatism is also a mishmash, it's fair to point out, right? American conservatism has a big dash of libertarianism in it. It also has a big dash of free market economics. It also has a big dash of traditionalism and nationalism, et cetera. That American conservatism is a mishmash also, and it's changing constantly. The neocons, their last hurrah was the Bush administration. Ever since then, the conservatives have been moving away from neoconservative rhetoric. So there you go. You talk about the transition in the Democrats from the mindset of being pro-Soviet to anti-Russian. All right. Pro-Soviet. All righty. Writing it down. So there you go. Someone said Rhodes Scholar Rachel Maddow pushes the Cold War so hard. Rachel Maddow is awful. Rachel Maddow is absolutely awful. I will never forget her interview with Andrew Yang. This shows you how utterly reprehensible Rachel Maddow is. She interviewed Andrew Yang on his show, and she asked Andrew Yang about, what about Russian meddling in our elections? What about Russian meddling in our elections? And Andrew Yang said, well, the American government meddles in various countries. And I will never forget, Rachel Maddow said, where? Where has America meddled in elections? Yeah. Now, she knows better than that. She used to work for Air America Radio. She was a Bush-era liberal. She was with Sam Cedar and all of them on Air America. She knows better than that. Your general method of researching historical topics. Okay. What is your general method of researching historical topics? All righty. And she knows better than that. And for her to do that, it shows how disingenuous she really is. There was an episode of her program, I saw the clip, and she said, what if America had interfered in a Russian election like this? I was just like, are you serious? And she's smarter than that. And that's why she's absolutely criminal. I can't stand Rachel Maddow. There we go. Next question. Apocalypse Now references dialectics. I didn't know that. I'll have to go watch it. Someone asked about English language books on socialism with Chinese characteristics. Well, that's the interesting thing, because someone else asked me about the 3-volume set behind me. So I guess this is a great opportunity to show you I can knock them out with 2 birds and 1 stone, right? This is the Ideological History of the Communist Party of China, 3 volumes. So if you want to know, this is the official Ideological History of the Communist Party of China in 3 volumes. This is the official Communist Party history of its autobiography, of its ideology. Volume 1 is about before the revolution. Volume 2 is about Mao's life and the Cultural Revolution. And Volume 3 is about since Mao, Deng Xiaoping, and the rise of Xi Jinping. This came out a couple years ago. It was gifted to me by a donor, a fan of the channel who wants to remain anonymous. But it is awesome. I really recommend it. And it's very, very inclusive. A lot of information here about socialism in China, socialist thought. This is it. The Ideological History of the Communist Party of China, all 3 volumes. It's a very recent publication, like in the last 2 or 3 years. It's really good shit. This is really, really good stuff. So there you go. I think that answered 2 questions in one. Have you seen Saving Boris, about Clinton advisors, how they sent to help Yeltsin defraud the Communist Party of the election? It's worth watching. Well, I haven't seen that movie, but I will type in 1996 election, Boris Yeltsin, because that's an important topic. All righty. All right. How did Americans' attitudes toward war differ between World War I and World War II? That's interesting. One thing that I do know, based on what I've read and based on, just talking to older folks, is that before World War II, there was a lot of anti-war sentiment among the population based on the trauma of World War I. And that doesn't get acknowledged, because now we talk about World War II being this glorious moment, the greatest generation. And it was. I mean, it was really great that we defeated fascism. I think the USA was absolutely right to fight in the Second World War. I don't think Hiroshima was right, obviously. Obviously, Japanese internment wasn't right, and bombing civilians wasn't right. But, even if the USA had been a socialist country, they still would have had to fight the Nazis and aid the USSR. And I think the USA was right in the Second World War, right to fight against fascism. And I think it was a great moment when the Americans, the Chinese, and the Russians and the Soviet Union all came together to defeat fascism. I think it was a great moment. But as far as because of the fact that World War II is remembered as being the good war, because of that, the anti-war sentiments among the population, I can't. I don't have anything on that right now. The anti-war sentiments among the population are very are kind of glossed over, right? They mention that that people were feeling isolationisty. They will mention that there was briefly some communist anti-war activism, before Pearl Harbor and before the Soviet Union was invaded. There was some of that. Right? The Communist Party was opposing the war at first, and then when the Nazi Hitler Pact was broken, and when Pearl Harbor happened, they changed their position. But there was also a big fascist anti-war grouping that was called the America First Committee, that was headed by Charles Lindbergh, who was the famous airline pilot of German-American heritage. And it included Elizabeth Dilling, who was a Nazi sympathizer and a member of the German-American Bund. And it included, JFK was a young guy. He was a member of it. Gerald Ford, who went on to become president of the United States, he was a member of it. A lot of very prominent Americans who were Roman Catholic, were members of the America First Committee, right? Are there any overlapping commonalities between George Orwell's 1984 and Marxism? Do you mean between the book, or what are you talking about? All right. But there was just, World War I, people don't realize how awful World War I really was. I mean, the trench warfare and being sent into World War I was a death sentence in a lot of cases. I mean, it was just, they were in these muddy trenches, and there were people with machine guns, and they would just, they'd say, over the hill, time to charge. And they would charge over the hill, and there'd be guys with machine guns, and they would just blow them all away. Read about the Battle of the Somme, in France, the Battle of the Somme. I mean, it was like hundreds of thousands of people killed in a single day. I mean, World War I was just a huge catastrophic waste of human life. It was just horrendous. World War I was just utterly horrendous. Chemical weapons were used, gas warfare, poison gas, and it was a nightmare. And there was no side for the working class in it. It was a fight, to preserve the profits of the capitalists. It was a fight over the colonized world. The American imperialists and the British imperialists and the French imperialists were in an alliance to stop the German imperialists and the Austrian imperialists and the Turkish imperialists. And that's basically what was going on. The Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the German Empire were trying to get a bigger slice of the pie. The American imperialists and British imperialists and French imperialists had gotten in on the imperialism game faster. They had developed quicker. They'd had capitalist revolutions first. And, Germany was very late in the game. You didn't get a German nation state until pretty late in the game. So Germany was kind of an up and coming imperialist power. And so Germany, you'll notice that Germany, in some ways, because it was an up and coming imperialist power, it was more, I guess, I don't know what the right word is. It was more, quote unquote, social democratic. And this is interesting, right? That, that they had a national healthcare service in Germany. They had public education in Germany. And the reason that they had those things was, on the one hand, it was because there was a huge socialist movement that demanded these things of the bosses. And on the other hand, it was because the German Kaiser, saw both of those things as military efficiency. The public education system that they had in Germany was largely about training the kids to be soldiers. It was about, putting military discipline into children from a young age. And, German, they call it Prussian education. It was very militarized. Right. And the National Health Service was seen as more efficient. And that was seen as like military efficiency. Right. And that the German Kaiser, in a lot of ways, German, pre-World War I Germany was a more, more social democratic place. There were a lot of open Marxists and labor unions and such. But it was also a much more militarized place because they were kind of an up and coming imperialist power. The British had obviously built a very militarized society. We in the United States had done that. But, German imperialism, because they were kind of up and coming, they implemented a lot of the reforms that, like public education, like a national healthcare service that socialists might fight for, but they did it to strengthen imperialism. And that's an important point to make. And that, social democracy was huge in Germany. The German Social Democratic Party was the biggest Marxist party in the world before World War I. And they sold out and they supported the war. Why did they support the war? Because they were embedded within the imperialist system, right? That they were running the trade unions, they were elected to parliament, and if they had opposed the war, they would have lost it all. They would have had to go into a full-on class struggle to oppose the war. And they were so well developed, and they had so many members of parliament and city council and so many trade unions that signed contracts and factories, that when the moment came, when the capitalists were saying, we're going to go have a capitalist war, and if you're against it, you go to jail, they said, we could lose all of this, or we could make some excuses about why to support the war. And that's what they did. The German Social Democratic Party sold out and supported the war. And that's why Rosa Luxemburg and Vladimir Lenin were so angry with the German Social Democratic Party. This was a huge Marxist party, one of the biggest political parties in Germany, millions of members, had fought against Bernstein and against revisionism, had pushed a revolutionary line until it mattered, right? On paper, they had great stuff. Karl Kautsky is a great writer and was always defending Marxism and defending the revolutionary interpretation and fighting against the reformist interpretation. But then when the rubber met the road, they sold out and supported the war. And that's why Rosa Luxemburg was so angry. And that's why Lenin was so angry. He said the Second International was a stinking corpse, and World War I broke out. And there were a lot of Marxists who did oppose World War I in Germany, but they were dissidents, right? They had the Independent Social Democratic Party, they had the Spartacus Bund, and it was pretty awful. One thing that there was anti-war sentiment in the United States. It was the socialists that opposed World War I, and socialists and some Christian pacifist elements, and they locked them all up. I mean, all of them. I mean, if you were against World War I, you went to jail. It didn't matter who you were. There was a Supreme Court case during the time. There was a farmer who had made remarks opposing the war within the privacy of his own home. Someone's car had broken down and they'd come to his house and he was helping them. And while he was helping them, he made anti-war comments, and that got reported, and he went to jail for anti-war comments he made within his own home. There was somebody who went to jail during World War I because they made a patriotic movie to support the war. And it was called The Spirit of 76. And it was all about 1776, this patriotic movie to support the war effort. But they portrayed the British as an enemy. And that was not supporting the war. So they threw them in jail for making a patriotic film called The Spirit of 1776. One thing that they did during World War I is that every male, had to have their draft card on them at all times. And their draft card. And if you were a male, there would be people on the street who would stop you at any point and say, where is your draft card? And if you could not produce a draft card, or if you were not, in military service, you would be arrested. And they had these people that patrolled the streets looking for young men. And if there was any young man anywhere, they would stop him and say, now, where's your draft card? If he couldn't produce a draft card, he got arrested, right? That happened, basically. It was full on military conscription. And also those guys who were patrolling the streets looking for young men, they were also looking for what they called seditious oratory, meaning anyone who was criticizing the war. If they saw you on a soapbox preaching against the war, they would arrest you. If they saw you handing out leaflets against the war, they would arrest you. It's worth noting there was a Supreme Court case, Schenck versus the United States. And that's where the phrase, shouting fire in a crowded theater comes from, where a socialist guy named Schenck, had been passing out socialist leaflets saying to people that were being drafted, don't fight in the war. And they put him in jail. They put him in jail for violating the war effort. Eugene Debs was sent to federal prison for giving an anti-war speech. After World War I had been so devastating. And I mean, it was bad for Americans. I mean, so many Americans died, but in Europe, it was like on the European mainland. It was France and Germany is where the fighting happened, right? In Belgium. And it was like, that's where the fighting was going on for so long. And where millions of people just died. That is where it was hit the worst. And afterwards, there was, among the whole population, there was just this anti-war sentiment. We don't want another war. We don't want another war. We need to make sure this never happens again. That was a very widespread sentiment among the population. And, the Communist Party, the communists were warning when the Great Depression began in the late 1920s. They were warning about the danger of fascism and war as a result of the capitalist crisis. And that's worth pointing out as well, that, the communists tapped into that anti-war sentiment. But ultimately, when it became clear that the fascists were in an all-out effort to destroy socialism, they were in an all-out effort to commit the Holocaust, to commit crimes against humanity, to conquer the entire world for the Nazis, it became clear that there was no way to avoid World War II. But there were a lot of people who were reluctant for isolationist reasons, for religious reasons, for political reasons. There was a lot of opposition to World War II based on the memory. It was just 20 years before you had World War I, and World War I was such a nightmare. So there you go. All righty. So there you go. The transition of Democrats from pro-Russia to anti-Russia. Well, I mean, during the Cold War, there was a feeling that the Democrats, this is really what it's about. I'll explain to you what it's about. It's about oil. The reason Democrats used to be friendly to Russia, and now, I shouldn't say they were friendly to Russia. The reason that during the Cold War, the Democrats were more friendly to Russia, and now the Democrats are more hostile to Russia, is about oil. It's about oil. That's really all it's about, right? There's been a long-standing rivalry in the United States between big super major oil companies, the Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, and the weapons manufacturers. And during the Cold War, the Democrats were the big oil faction. The Rockefellers were pushed into the Democratic Party. They had been Republicans, but they were basically the John Birch Society and the far right wing and the military-industrial complex forced the Rockefellers, the Eastern establishment, into the Democratic Party, right? They hated Nixon. They hated the John Birch Society, and it forced them into the Democratic Party. And, the big oil folks, the Rockefellers, they funded, the birth control movement, the Birth Control League. They funded the Kinsey research, and they're social liberals. And the military-industrial complex was making a lot of money off the arms race. So the Rockefellers they're social liberals, they're all about abortion and birth control and free love. And they're also in with the CIA, and they're financing, the modern art and the Congress for Cultural Freedom programs. The Rockefellers paying for all of it, right? So the CIA liberals, they wanted to negotiate with the USSR and gradually sink American influence into the USSR and gradually carry out a counter-revolution. The military-industrial complex wanted to make lots of money by building more nukes and more weapons, etc. There was a rivalry in strategy, right? The Rockefellers were for this kind of covert, psychological, long-term strategy of rolling back Soviet influence, and the military-industrial complex was for a full-on, just escalate the arms race, make lots of money selling weapons. That was the divide. Right? I don't know enough about it. That was the divide. So, you had that divide. And so the big oil folks wanted to negotiate with the USSR because that was a way to slip American influence in there. Well, then the Soviet Union fell. Then in the 1990s, it was an economic disaster. But then Putin restored the economy of Russia, right, and fixed it up. And how did Putin fix it? By making Russia a major oil and gas exporter. And that's what Russia is. They're a major oil and gas exporter. They export oil and gas on the international markets. So now they're a direct competitor with American super major oil companies. That's what they are. So the big oil folks now see them as a direct competitor, rather than the big oil folks wanting to push a CIA soft power strategy against them, and the hard right wing with the military industrial complex wanting to make a lot of money by escalating the arms race. Now it's flipped. And now the big oil companies see them as a threat because they're selling oil on the international markets in competition with Wall Street. And the military industrial complex people don't really care that much, right? They just want to sell weapons. They don't really care, right? And there you go. And you'll notice that Trump, they said Trump was so pro-Russian. But what did Trump do when he was president? Rip up nuclear agreements with Russia, the Clear Skies Agreement, the Short Range Nuclear Treaty. Why? Because Trump was for the military industrial complex. And those arms treaties reduce the amount of weapons that are being sold. So there you go. It's about understanding, the Democrats are big oil and the Republicans are the military industrial complex. I mean, it's obviously more complicated than that, but historically, since the Cold War, that's been the divide that we've had in U.S. politics among the ruling class. And, the strategy for dealing with Russia that different factions in the American ruling class have had has changed based on that, on Russia now as a major oil exporter. All right. What is my general, how do you generally go about researching historical topics? I don't know. That's kind of a broad question. One thing I will do, if you want hard data, CIA World Fact Book, go on the internet and look for the CIA World Fact Book. Look for the Library of Congress Country Studies. The United Nations has good statistics, stuff like GDP growth, life expectancy, infant mortality rate, rate of literacy. If you want just hard data on countries, that's a good place to go, because they can give you all the commentary you want, but the hard data doesn't lie, right? And that's the information that the ruling class uses to make their decisions. They're not trying to propagate at the Library of Congress Country Study or with the CIA World Fact Book. They're just trying to give you the hard facts. Now, as far as other forms of research, right? Look, the worst thing you can do is go to Barnes and Noble and just go to the history section and pick out a book, because everything you're going to read there is going to be very mass marketed and very put out there. One thing to look for is who are the top academics. Who are the top academics on a topic? Not the top selling writers, but the top academics. Now, it doesn't always work, right? Russian studies at Yale is just trash, right? Because it's propaganda. But for example, the top Russian or the top scholar of Korean history in America is Dr. Bruce Cummings, who's an amazing writer. Dr. Bruce Cummings is a great writer. I think I have one of his books over here. No, I don't. But he's a great writer. And Dr. Bruce Cummings, he's not a communist by any means, and he doesn't think that North Korea is socialist. He says North Korea is a corporate state or something. But what he writes about North Korea is more or less the truth, because he's one of the top scholars. He's doing the real research on the topics to inform American folks. And I've met Dr. Bruce Cummings. We talked when he came to my university. He's a great person. He's honest, right? And he said they frequently called him at ABC News and NBC and said, "Can you confirm that Kim Jong-il has the world's largest collection of porn?" And he says, No, I can't confirm that. And he says, "Where did you hear that?" And they always say some anonymous source within the South Korean military or South Korean intelligence. And these things get reported as facts. But if you read his book, North Korea, Another Country, or Korea's Place in the Sun, if you read that book, you're going to get a much more honest assessment of North Korea and the Korean War and their history, because he is the most respected scholar on the topic. And that's one way of going about it, right? Is looking for academics who aren't famous, but are some of the more respected in their field. Because in academia, as much as I don't like academia, and as much as their books are very dry, they're not going to be very exciting, interesting books, they are held to much higher standards. If you go to Barnes and Noble, you're going to find a lot of whiz-bang, stuff that's designed to, knock your socks off and entertain you. So that's what I would recommend if you're looking for accurate historical information. Look for just raw economic data. Look for respected academics who are not particularly famous. But there you go. That's what I would recommend. Now, this next question, someone asked about Boris Yeltsin and the 1996 election. Yes, the United States rigged the 1996 elections in Russia. That's like wildly recognized that the United States did everything they could to make sure that Boris Yeltsin was reelected in 1996, to make sure the communists didn't win the election. The USA meddled in doing it. There's a Time magazine cover all about it. They bragged about it. They made documentaries about it. The USA meddling in the 1996 elections in Russia is a historical fact. And the fact that the U.S. media didn't even bring that up when they were making all these wild allegations about Russian meddling in U.S. elections shows how ridiculously biased they are, right? I mean, it's like we're led to believe Russia supposedly meddled in the U.S. election because of a few memes. You know, there's some Facebook memes that got bought by a hot dog guy in Moscow or something. Like, give me a break. Whereas the U.S. government brags about meddling in Russia's elections in 1996. The next question we've gotten here. Someone said, what about 1984 and Marxism overlapping? The George Orwell's 1984 and Marxism overlapping. Well, the book is an anti-communist book. It's not as blatantly anti-communist. Animal Farm is George Orwell's most blatant anti-communist propaganda. That's the most, it's just blatant anti-communist propaganda. 1984 is about totalitarianism, and there's kind of a vague references to Marxism. They call it INGSOC, English Socialism, but it is a book and film and play that forms the more or less standard American perceptions of what communism is. So I mean, George Orwell had been he was from a leftist kind of background. He wrote Down and Out in Paris and London about the conditions that homeless people go through. He fought for the Trotskyites in Spain with the POUM, the Trotskyite division in the Spanish Civil War, and then after that he became a worker for he worked for the British Ministry of Propaganda, the Ministry of Information. He was a propagandist during the Second World War, and after the Second World War he published a couple anti-communist screeds. He published 1984 and Animal Farm. The CIA made a movie version of Animal Farm that they completely paid for during the 1950s. I mean, I don't like George Orwell very much. I mean, my main critiques of George Orwell come from the book Animal Farm, which is just utter trash, has nothing to do with Soviet history. Nothing to do with Soviet history. And it's infuriating because most people in the United States, they don't know actual Soviet history. They know this stupid book about barnyard animals that they had to read in school. One of the things I'll just show you how inaccurate George Orwell's 1984 Animal Farm is. In Animal Farm, one of the characters, so Animal Farm is supposed to be an analogy for the Russian Revolution. It's supposed to be an analogy for the Russian Revolution, right? And it's a bunch of barnyard animals overthrow and kill the farmer and take over the farm. That's the idea, right? So, it's supposed to be the Russian Revolution, and the pigs are the leaders of the revolution, and they're supposed to be the party. And then there's this character in the novel called Boxer the Horse, and he's a horse. I didn't know that, Gleb. I didn't know that. And Boxer the Horse is supposed to represent the Russian proletariat. And Boxer the Horse is portrayed as very stupid and very loyal. And he comes up with a slogan that the head pig is called Napoleon. He says, Napoleon is always right. Napoleon is always right. He's supposed to be very stupid and very loyal. And so then after Boxer the Horse gets old and he can't work anymore, the pigs send him to the glue factory to be killed and turned into glue. And, it says that back in the old days, the horses, when they got old and they couldn't work, they just ran through the meadows and they didn't have to work and they retired. But under the new regime, they turned him into glue. Okay, they didn't exterminate old people in the fucking Soviet Union. Okay, I can't get over how much of a dirty lie that is. Do you know what the retirement age in the Soviet Union was? Do you know how good the Soviet Union was to old people? I mean, they had a lower retirement age than the United States. They had special like vacation homes for them. People who had lived in utter poverty. Not only did they get a guaranteed job their whole life, not only did they get but then they got to retire and they got to go like be on the beach in Sochi. And I mean, the Soviet Union was very good to old people, right? For all the problems of Soviet society, which there were plenty, the Soviet Union was very, very good to old people. But if you read this stupid book about farm animals, you would think that in the Soviet Union, when you got too old to work, they exterminated you. They sent you to the glue factory. I mean, if that is not a dirty, rotten lie, I don't know what one is. And then on top of that, the way they portray, not only, the Soviet Union didn't exterminate old people. That didn't happen, okay? Not only that, but to top it all off, the way they portray Boxer the Horse as being stupid, right? That is an insult to the people who saved the world from Hitler. That's an insult to the people who built their country up from nothing and industrialized their country and invented space travel and built the world's largest hydroelectric power plants and the world's largest steel mills. And I mean, the miracles that the Russian working class achieved during the Stalin years. I mean, they had the best ballet and gymnastics performers in the world. They had the best movies in the world. Sergei Eisenstein and the Montage, the father of the Montage. They had the best music, Shostakovich, for Christ's sakes. I mean, it's like, they perform miracles, these people did. I mean, raising a whole country up from nothing, defeating the Nazis, inventing space travel, inventing LED lights, electrifying the whole country, building new universities, amazing art, amazing sciences. And to just sum that up as, they're stupid, and then they get sent to the glue factory. That's why they have us read that crap in American schools, because it has nothing to do with what actually happened in the Soviet Union during that period. I mean, if you think the American greatest generation were great, right? And they were. My grandparents were great people, right? They went through a lot. You think the American greatest generation was great. The Soviet greatest generation, those are some of the most tough people. 26 million of their people died. And those folks survived and they fought, right? The Great Patriotic War. I mean, you want to talk about a good group of folks, an iron generation, if there ever was one. It's those people. And, raising their whole country up, wiping out illiteracy, building up a modern country, defeating the Nazi invaders, inventing space travel, huge scientific achievements, a whole impoverished country becoming a superpower. I mean, the way George Orwell depicts them as this stupid horse that goes, boxers, Napoleon's always right. That is just so criminal. It is so utterly criminal, right? I mean, it is utterly criminal that he teaches that book is taught in American schools, right? I mean, that book shouldn't be anywhere. I mean, it's a crime that book is so widespread. I mean, it's just like, I'm sorry, but you want to talk about anti-populism. You want to talk about why I hate Hannah Arendt and I hate postmodernism. I hate the Congress for Cultural Freedom and Partisan Review. That's what they don't just think that about the Russian working class, the people, that achieved all those miracles. They think about it, you and me, right? All the working people, we're all just a bunch of fools. We're all just a bunch of, stupid rednecks, and we're stupid fools. We couldn't possibly do anything, and we need them to rule over us. We need this elite to rule over us. And if we get together and start demanding our rights, that's called fascism, don't you know? Deep down, they're all just a bunch of Eichmanns. That's what they are, and that's why we've got to control them. I mean, it's just the most cynical and evil mindset. Leo Strauss, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, Mary McCarthy, Susan Sontag, all of them, whether it's the neocons or the synthetic left, they all have the same elitist mindset that the people are the enemy. The people are the enemy. And it is criminal. It's absolutely criminal. We got to stand against the synthetic left, because George Orwell is a big part of the synthetic left. It's a big part of synthetic left ideology. And we got to stand against it, folks. All right, folks. Oh, there's one more question. Oh, no, that's it. No, there's not one more question. All right, we're done, folks. I guess we'll just end the show. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody. Sleep well.